This is
RedPubPod. RedPubPod.
RedPubPod.
a podcast from Redhawk Publications.
RedPubPod.
4,
RedPubPod.
3, 2, 1. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening out there in podcast land. This is Robert Knight coming to you live from the plush welded studios of Catawba Valley Community College. This is RedPubPod.
Yay!
Today we are here with Patricia Thompson, our editor who takes the stuff in the door, and we're celebrating a new book today called Down to the Root, Short Stories by David Dickson. Say hello to the folks, David Dickson.
Hey, RedPubPod people.
We're also here with the local poet laureate of the Henry River Mill Village set, Tim Peeler. So hello to Tim Peeler.
Hey, folks.
He's wearing his Catawba Valley Community College baseball hat for those of you who are visually impaired out there and can't see us. We're doing this via Zoom today because COVID is going around again and we don't want to be in the same room with each other. No, not really. We're just doing it this way because it's cool and we want to give you an opportunity to maybe see us as well as hear us. So today we are talking about Down to the Root. It's a 6x9 trade paperback. It's about 142 pages, $17 retail. But if you go to our website right now, it's on sale for $12. And David Dickson signed every copy that we have in stock with a really cool signature. So you want that? You want it right now? Go to our website, redhawkpublications.com, and order that bad boy. So, David, what brought on this book, Down to the Root?
Well, Robert, I've been writing stories for a really long time, and my mother, who is just turned 88 years old, she's a fantastic reader, and I always wanted her to have a book, and she had always been encouraging me to get a book published. So really, I think that was the motivation to do it now, so that my mom will be able to have the book and read it and enjoy it. And so that's what got me going. But it also, I had some prompting from Tim Peeler and my eldest son, Carter, who helped me locate the files on all these stories and kind of pull it together. And Tim helped edit it, helped me a lot. So it took a lot of folks to get me motivated and to get it out there. So I'm very appreciative.
Hey, David, if you don't mind me asking, how old would you say the oldest story is that's in this collected story collection?
I think probably the oldest one would be the first story in the collection, and the jumping off place.
Right.
Right. So that's a fairly older story. I don't know how old. I think it was published in North Carolina Literary Review, and that may have been 20 years ago.
Wow. Okay. So at least we have some context. It's as going back as far as the turn of the century.
Yeah. Yes. Almost another century ago.
Where do we get? I know it's one of the stories in the book, but why did you choose the story Down to the Root to be the main title of the collection? What are the words down to the root mean to you?
Well, within that, the story itself, I guess the title has some connection to the main character and how he creates art in one way. And within that story, he uses ginseng roots to create these little cycloramas or little imagery things that he comes up with. And so there was that connection. And then the other person that's kind of a protagonist in that story, she's really wanting to get into the world of this artist and kind of get down to the root of his creativity. She's more of an observer than a creator of art. But I think maybe it has other meanings for other people. When I've talked to them about it, I think Tim maybe has some thoughts on that story in particular, but the story's placed not quite in the middle of the collection, but I think it's in many ways kind of an anchor story. There are some of the characters in that story appear again in other stories. But I'm not really sure how much thought I gave to it, actually, Robert.
Okay. That's it. Go ahead, Patty.
I will say that particular story to me, and I am from the Northeast, it was the perfect crossroads of a local person that, let's say, lives in the mountain, rural country person who's a little crazy, meeting somebody from the Northeast with the Northeast sensibilities. It was like the perfect crossroads. And I could see how an outsider would think so much craziness is going on here, but she maintains and she's got her vision and her focus. And then you've got that crazy character, the Pink Man, I believe it was. I am a big fan of this collection, if you can't tell. So I do encourage everyone to get it. But you've got some characters that really will just stick with you, like a bad habit. They're memorable characters, and the Pink Man was definitely one of them. And he does show up in another story as well. Fascinating, crazy guy.
Mm-hmm.
How many crazy people have you met in your life, David? Where do these characters come from? I mean,
there's that.
I think the first one he met was in the mirror.
Well, there's one I live with all the time that I see every day. But the character Danny Ray Pack, the Pink Man, I knew three people in my life who happened to have the same. I don't want to call it an affliction, but he was an albino African American person that had, this kind of odd physical appearance. But the three people that I knew in my life that came together to create this character all were very, unique in their own way, and fascinating to me because not just of their oddity in the placement of where the community they lived in, but it just really fueled my imagination. I knew one of these people as a child. And then I knew two others as an adult. And so, my imagination creating characters, oftentimes I'm bringing in elements from a lot of different people. I don't think I really, in this collection anyway, I don't think I'm writing about one specific person and trying to make them into a fictional character.
One of the things that's interesting to me about this collection is how it kind of deviates from your normal stories of Southern desperation, which, include, poverty and situations that people get themselves in, that you interact with other people from around the country. There are several stories where characters will come from a myriad parts of the United States, and they all seem to share that same kind of desperation and that same kind of need for God, I can't think of the word, that we matter as human beings. Are you trying to show that human beings are human beings regardless of what geological aspect of the country or the world that they're from?
Well, I would hope that I'm trying to do that. I don't know if it was Faulkner or somebody talking about William Faulkner, about him describing his own little postage stamp of the world. He wrote about this county that he maybe knew really, and then he made up in a fictional setting, and it was just focused on this one place. I very much am a regional writer in the sense that I've spent all of my life in the South for the most part. But in my fiction, I don't really think of just limiting myself to a certain place, and I would hope that whatever humanness exists in one place, that the humanity part of it, I would hope anyway, in writing fiction, that would apply wherever I decide to set a story. Those human qualities, I think, are the same wherever we're talking about geographically.
I think that openness kind of elevates the stories. Faulkner wrote about, like you said, a postage stamp, Yakwapanatha County.
Right.
and basically made the statement that every one of his stories was about the South coming to terms with losing the Civil War.
Right.
So, what we see of a lot of Southern writers today is a lot of that stuff tied to that kind of angst. But your stories seem to be open more to these things that just flummox human beings who just might happen to be, they could be in Los Angeles or they could be in New Jersey, but they just so happen to be where you are geographically from. So I think that's a positive aspect to the stories. David, what did you do for a living before you became a writer?
Well, early as a very young man, I did a lot of different kinds of stuff. I worked for an underwater construction company. I was a copywriter in an advertising agency. I did a lot of menial labor as a young man. And back in those days, I was also involved in theater, and I'd been in a couple of films. And I was doing character research back then. I was always working. I had read or somewhere I had picked up this tip that if you ever wanted to be an actor, that you had to observe everyday people, and you needed to have kind of crappy jobs, and so I bought into that as a young man in my late teens and early 20s, and I think that served me well when I started writing in my mid 20s, and then I married and was getting ready to start a family, and I decided I didn't want to keep doing kind of work where I had to travel, and I went back to school and got my teaching certificate and became a high school history teacher. So I did that for 27 years. I taught school, and then I was able to have the summers to spend with my children and travel and pursue other interests. So that's pretty much the bulk of my working years was in a classroom.
And you split your time between North Carolina and Texas?
Yes. My mom's family is from Texas, and my sister and I were both born in Texas. And so I would come back when my father retired from the Air Force, he came back to his hometown of Elkin, North Carolina. So I would go to school in Elkin, and then as soon as school was out, I would go back and spend the summers with my Texas family. So it's kind of like I have there's this concept about the South that there's this like duality of some people living in the past and then trying to deal with the future. And for me, the duality was, I was mostly in North Carolina. And when I was in North Carolina, I was thinking of Texas. When I was in Texas, I was thinking of North Carolina. So that has continued through my adult life. I live in North Carolina. I've always maintained a residence, but I also have a residence in Texas, and so I spend most of my time in North Carolina these days.
Of course you do, because we've nominated your book for the North Carolina Book Award, and you have to be a North Carolina resident. So we know you are, David. You pay taxes here. You're North Carolina.
Of course I am.
Maybe you can double dip, and we can nominate him for some Texas awards too.
Hey, yeah, we could do that.
Let's take just a minute here to remind everybody that you can go to redhawkpublications.com and pick up David's book. It's on sale for $12. That's $5 off. That'll cover the postage, because the least media mail right now is like $4.63. Thank you, United States Post Office, for making shipping unaffordable for the masses. Also, I want to remind you that we've picked up a sponsor, an actual paid sponsor to RedPubPod, Tasteful Beans Coffee House, located in downtown Hickory. And we'll get the hours and stuff like that for you when we're better prepared. We're never prepared on this podcast, so it doesn't surprise me that I don't know the hours to.
Well, they're new to being a sponsor, so we'll have this.
Yeah, they're new, so, and their check hasn't cleared yet either. So
they're always open.
They're always open.
Yeah, just go on over there.
Don't go at 3:00 in the morning though, because there might be some dangerous people downtown. I don't know. But also too, Patty wants me to kind of mention, and we'll go into the more detail of this toward the end of the broadcast. There's a date you guys out there need to remember, August 8th, in the year of our Lord 2024, whose name has been changed to protect the innocent. There's going to be a big visitor to Hickory. Patty, do you want to tell us about that for about 15 seconds or so?
Sure. We've got Ron Rash coming. It's going to be the evening of Ron Rash and friends, because on August 8th at the Drendel Auditorium in Hickory, we will have Ron Rash interviewed by Ed Southern from the NC Writers Network. And we will also have as special guest David Dickson. He'll be there to also do a reading from his book. So we're going to have two folks coming back home to Hickory, which we're really happy to hear. It'll be free. Doors open at 6, but the event starts at 6:30. Books will be available for signing and purchase at about 7:45. So it should be a fun evening. We hope folks will come out.
Yeah, we'll be somewhere in a room right before you go into the main auditorium, and we'll have books for sale, both Ron Rash's paperback version of his new one called The Caretaker, I believe it is, and then we'll have copies of Down to the Root there too. So put that on your calendar, put the date and the time and the location, and come and see us and help us support art here in North Carolina through Catawba Valley Community College's Redhawk publications. We love you out there. David, the dialogue and the language in this book rings true to me. Does this come from part of your lifetime of listening and paying attention and studying other people? When people talk in this, they use the idioms and sound like people that I grew up with. Is that where this comes from?
I suppose it does, Robert. I've always been, I was a good mimic as a little kid. I was good at, my family watched Hee Haw, and I could do an imitation of Buck Owens, man. Even as a little kid, I was always listening, and trying to do different voices or different characters. And I think that maybe is just, like a natural interest that I always had. But in writing dialogue, I guess I learned early on in the process that, especially if you're writing a Southern dialect, that it's kind of easy to fall into these, I don't want to say tropes, but, writing in a vernacular that does not really translate on the page. So, I try to be conscious of writing in a character's voice in a manner that when we're reading it, that it's going to sound authentic. It's going to sound as if that character is speaking those words. So I don't know if there's a trick to that or not, but I do believe that it was from, always kind of paying attention to how people speak and being aware of that even as a young person.
This is kind of a good lesson for writers out there, because a lot of people who are writing, they struggle with this. David, do you hear them in your voice when they are conversing, your characters? Or is it when it comes out as your first draft, when you go back in to revise or you go back in to edit, do you then hear the different voices, whether they're male or female? Do you hear that character inside your head?
Yes, and that's kind of a nuts thing to have going on in your head, is to literally hear other characters speak to you. And Tim and I, we exchange a lot of writings almost every day. He and I will be sending things back and forth, and he knows for a fact that there have been times when I've had characters speaking to me, and it was almost as if I was channeling. And I know that sounds crazy, but it would, and it is. But sometimes characters speak in my head, and so the dialogue that I'm writing down is almost as if I'm transcribing, what I'm hearing. And I guess if that's happening, it means it's coming pretty easy at that point in time. It's not that way all the time, though.
I don't think that's crazy. I think that's creation. I think that's art. Tennessee Williams once said that when he was asked, how do you write such wonderfully convincing women characters in your plays? And he stated that he basically had a conduit from God that gave him characters like Blanche Dubois and the lady Elizabeth Taylor played in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof.
Right.
For a man to be able to write these female characters, and also too, Williams claimed to have what Jung calls the anima and the animus, both half feminine and half masculine. Enough femininity to be able to recognize how to put forth these characters. Tim Peeler, when you're doing Southern characters and dialect, and when you're coming up with your poetry and prose stories, do you hear your characters in your head?
I do. And when I get in the middle of one of those long prose poetry pieces, it's like I'm walking around and I may be meeting people in day-to-day life, but that story's in my head going on all the time. And
Yeah.
when you really get in the middle of a story like that, it can make you a little bit crazy. If you talk to Ron Rash while he was writing Serena, he'll tell you the same thing. It's like something that's that powerful will take over your life, and you walk around and people don't understand why you look so vacant because you're somewhere else.
That's exactly what an instructor at Clarion back in 2003 at Michigan State University told me. A gentleman named Damon Knight was saying, if you run across a plot point or something that doesn't work, you give it to your silent partner, which basically is your subconscious, and you walk around with it all day, and the answer will come to you when you're in the shower or driving to the drive-through window or something like that. The plot will connect, or the thing that character needs to say will connect. So again, I don't think these things might wear and tear on your psyche because you're walking around with it all the time. But I think it's one of those talents that artists have. And I think everybody's got it. I think all human beings have the ability to imagine. And some of us just take that and fine tune it to where you make it work for you. So, we get books like Down to the Root and Serena, and all the stuff that Larry Brown did before he passed away, Faulkner, to mention again, and all of the other wonderful writers.
Just going to add one more thing. I think what's interesting, because of David's acting background and knowing what is involved in character study,
Exactly.
When you're given a part and you're supposed to figure out why this character what's their motivation, what's their backstory, and you've had that in the beginning because you had some training in theater, and you brought that training into writing, so you're very attuned to characters, and you can tell that just your agility of going between different types of characters in your stories. I mean, you've got the woman from the Northeast who's trying to do a doc on the Pink Man. You've got the kid, Kyle. You've got the older gentleman who's trying to work in a motorcycle shop. You've got so many diverse background characters that are rich. And I can't help believe it's not just because of your craft and your attention to writing, but you've got a real fine-tuned taste to deep characters. So they're memorable characters, every single one of them.
Yeah, could I say something about David? And this kind of jumps back to a little bit earlier in this interview to his teaching. But I always knew that he was a great storyteller because I've been all over the place with this guy and been through some crazy situations. But anyway, when I found out that in his high school classes at the end of the year, he would show his classes the movie Easy Rider and teach it to them as reverse manifest destiny. And whenever I heard that, I knew he was a genius.
Well,
Because that's what it is. They're coming back across the country.
Yeah.
No.
And David, talking about the jobs he worked, he was once a dynamite truck driver.
This is true.
Oh, like the Wages of Fear.
So he drove a truck with dynamite in it from
Yeah, like the
water projects to
Wages of Fear.
I did
another.
indeed.
That William Friedkin made an updated film version of it called The Sorcerer with Roy Scheider. These guys that have nothing to lose and they need money so bad that they will drive these dynamite trucks down in Honduras or somewhere across these little tiny bridges and things like that. And you've got to be a special kind of nut to do that, according to this text. So
Well, if we ever get all of these stories together that he recorded a couple years ago, there's one really good one about driving the dynamite truck.
oh yeah, I wanted to talk about those. I was on the receiving end of a few of those. I remember one about a fella who got a fish hook run through his. Well, let you tell it, David. Where did he get the fish hook stuck?
That story was about my great grandfather, Clarence Wells, and he was born in 1888. So that's 2 centuries ago. And he passed away when I was 14. So I got to spend some good time with him. But one of the things that he did later in life is he made fishing lures, and he would purchase the feathers and the hooks, and he would melt lead that he would find into these molds, and then he would tie the feathers on and take thread and then tie the knot. And then when I was with him one day after he'd been melting this lead in a hot kitchen, he was finishing off a lure, and he took the lure to bite the thread off, and the barb got hung up underneath his tongue. So he left the kitchen. I followed him into the bathroom, and he went into the bathroom, and he had a pair of needle nose pliers, and he pushed that hook all the way through his tongue till the barb came out, and he clipped it off and then pulled it back through his tongue and never flinched, never even whimpered. And I just remember I was probably 11 or 12 watching him do that. And it was just such a memorable, a lot of things about him. That's another thing. As a child, I spent a lot of time with people that were from another generation, and they were all great storytellers. And I think that maybe, my inheritance from my family was that I got to hear great oral stories my entire life that really fed my imagination. And so, when I was recording these stories that we're talking about, a lot of them are just me recalling things, like that have happened or that I observed in my life from childhood on through adult life. So I would like to think that was my master's program, was being able to lucky enough to be around people that told great stories.
I believe a lot of readers out there might not understand or may not even know that, lots of stories that they read in novels and in collections are those stories that are passed down from families. I know a lot of Ron Rash's work is based in stuff that he heard growing up. And I think in some ways that's wonderful, because that means that your grandfather or great grandfather is always with us.
Yeah.
Even if it is that one episode, we get to see inside the actions of a man born in the 19th century,
Right.
at a completely different time. I can imagine today someone getting a fish hook run through their tongue. I can't imagine somebody being stoic about it.
Yeah, they'd be in the emergency room, I imagine.
Yeah.
No way would you push it all the way through to
Right.
cut it off. You'd be waiting for the EMS to show up, and you'd just be, whimpering and
Right.
it'll send you to Jesus right quick.
That is true.
So I hope we can find these, at least a majority of these things, because we would love to translate them into text and then publish those as well too. There's a nice little book to continue these stories, because again, stories is what makes humanity run. And so I hope Mr. Peeler can find all the ones.
I believe we located most of them, Robert.
Okay, that's
I would
great.
say 3.5 hours worth.
Oh,
would be
okay.
my guess from looking at the at what was in there.
And I think Patty's trying to tell me again, do I need to talk about August 8th again, or?
No, I just was able to do it, so I'm having fun.
Oh,
My
okay.
apologies.
For those of you who might not be watching the Zoom recording, Patty's playing with her background.
Yeah.
So she's got Ron Rash and the Evening with Ron Rash advertisement in it. We were talking a few moments ago about dialogue and about the use of language. Definitely the southern part of the United States is rich in language, but there are other parts of the country that are rich in language too. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the words that you use, particularly some words that some folks might find offensive nowadays, but you use anyway. And we had somewhat of a back and forth with our printer on a couple of these words, and they weren't curse words. They were words that kind of have been appropriated or really one of the most awful words on the face of the planet. Dave, why do your characters use these words?
Well, if I'm writing a dialogue and I'm allowing a character to speak in an honest way, I'm not going to be. I would rather a story not get published than for me to edit because I'm writing for an audience to accept whatever these characters are doing. So I try not to use language in a gratuitous way or a manner in which is intended to offend or to shock. But sometimes characters speak in certain manner that the language has to be true to that character. So in the case of the two stories where there is this language that I know some people are going to find offensive, I'm not really in a position to defend that character saying it or to defend myself as an author using it. But I am confident in saying that character would have used those words in that situation, and that it's honest to that character is my explanation for it.
And I will go as far as to say it was the very first page of the very first story where, well, actually the very first line got my attention and made me want to read more. And, the very last sentence of the first page has the N-word. So naturally, I need to read this, figure out what you're doing with this word. And I'll be honest with you, I had no problem with it because by the time I read it in context of that character, you create these rich characters. The father isn't even that big of a character, but that guy. You show and you tell. So I had no problem with it. And that's a testament to the fact that you create these characters that he said that.
Right. Well, if people read a story and are taking up language as a topic of discussion, then I think whatever story or book or poem that they're talking about, then that is a positive, because language and how it affects us, if it can evoke certain emotions in us. We live in a time where people are not wanting all of us to read whatever we want to read. So if the discussion is being had about language and what it evokes and what it means, or who can use it, who can't use it, then I'm okay with being a part of that discussion, and because I think that's a healthy thing.
I just know that I want to let people know that Redhawk Publications is an equal opportunity publisher, and we do not censor our writers regardless of what they write, and we will not allow our printers or allow our other folks out there who are in our distribution chain to censor what we do either. We'll find alternative ways to get these pieces of art to market, because like you mentioned to me in private conversation one other time, these folks use these words as hurtful to another character. There's reason in the plot. There's reason in character development for them to use these words. They're not gratuitous.
Right.
So I wanted to talk to you for a minute about one of my favorite stories. I'm always the kind of guy that always picks something that's an outlier or something that's different. Over on page 105, you've got a story in the book called Matters of Honor.
Yes.
Have you got your copy of your book with you?
Yeah.
Would you do me a favor and read that page 105, the opening of the story, down to maybe the word altogether, and give everybody a sense of like what David Dickson sounds like reading, and also a little bit of an indication of what a David Dickson story reads like, because I think this is wonderful prose. Not that every story in the book's not wonderful prose, but there is something about this story, Matters of Honors, that resonates with me. I really like it. So would you mind reading that?
Sure. Okay. All right, here we go. Somewhere Mark Frierson is eating Krispy Kreme donuts, his fat face flush. Tiny flakes of sugar glaze glint in his wispy mustache. He licks full lips and brushes bits of fallen dough from his shirt. I want to call his name to demand he acknowledge my presence, but I always wait. I wait for the decision that never comes. My dream always ends before he gets the news, the word that he is out. Mark Frierson is a kid killer. I suspected it even before the crimes, and I never said a word. Acting on suspicion never seemed a good idea. Certainty, I have since learned, is the one false truth to trust. Looking back, I am justified, but in the end, life isn't worth living if people get dragged off because of another's unfounded accusations. And in my case, I'm prone to assume the worst. It was easy back then for people to speak of him with contempt. Before the girls got killed, everybody assumed him harmless. And by feeling sorry for Mark, they didn't appreciate his enormous unrealized potential. Mark was a repulsive kid. His black eyes were surrounded by white flesh, like coal and snow, which in part accounted for his peculiar appearance. At once a premature man, a perpetual toddler. By the age of 11, he stalked Main Street in his dead father's clothes, decked out in khaki dungarees, too big blazer and wingtips. He'd become a hulking slob even before the onset of puberty. With a change in his hormones, he got even fatter, and his lips sprouted a downy brush of fuzz. The meat of his face swelled around dark eyes until the flab threatened to cover his lids altogether.
See, that's just great prose. I love the crunchiness of that, all the alliteration, and I'm just seeing this guy, and I'm also seeing guys and people that I've known like that, and you don't just shove down our throat what his problem is or what the situation is. It's very delicately handled, and it's one of these stories that reminds me of like Peeler, who was it that wrote that story, The Curse? Was that Andre Dubus?
That sounds right.
Wrote that story, The Curse. It's got this really
The
nice
father.
Yeah, his Andre Dubus' third dad or something. But anyway, it's very ambiguous, and I like how the guy, our narrator here, is saying that he knew something was up, but he didn't want to be the one to accuse, because you don't want to be the one to falsely accuse and get a guy in trouble or ruin their reputation. And I think that tension right there is terrific, because we know that he is a child killer because he's just told us. And because the narrator, the character, is like, I always assume the worst, so I have to be careful where I don't overstep my bounds. I think it's just a fascinating story. Can you tell me, was there something in real life or something in your experience that fed into this story that informed it?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I was probably 7 or 8. I had a great uncle in Texas who was the sheriff of Grayson County, Texas. And I would spend when I was out there, I get to go to the courthouse with him, and the jail was on the top floor of the courthouse where the inmates were kept. And he would let me go in there and get my hair cut by the trustees and eat lunch with them. But during that period of time, there was a 17-year-old guy in that town who murdered two little girls, and one of the girls was murdered in September, and then the next was murdered the following April. So there was like this half of a year period of time when the community was really terrified about this killer being on the loose. And when they finally arrested him, he was this kid that was very similar to what I described in the story. And so he was in the jail awaiting trial, and I would go up and just kind of look at him, just stand in front of his jail cell and look at this guy. And he was kind of a sad, pathetic character. But the community always has marked whenever he comes up for parole. And now this has been, I think the murders happened in 1968, 69, and 69 and 70. So every year this guy comes up for parole, and members of the community will write the parole board in Huntsville, Texas to, state that they remember the case. But people are dying off, and not many people remember this case any longer. And so that was part of the whole idea, because my uncle, who was the sheriff, he fought in World War II with Audie Murphy. He slayed a bunch of Nazis, saw a bunch of terrible stuff in Europe. But this case was the one that just really kind of broke him down late in his career, is the fact that these two little girls were murdered by this guy. And so it was always in my head. And maybe it was a way of me getting it out of my head, to make it into a fictional story with some conclusion to it. I guess that's where it comes from.
Well, it's certainly like all the stories in this collection. It grabs a hold of you from the very first line. Eating Krispy Kreme donuts, which that resonates with folks from around this area. And like Patty said earlier, sometimes that first line, you're a master of first lines, because you read that first line and you're just hooked, because you're going, I got to figure out what's going on here, because this is fascinating. So right here, let's see, Patty, does your little timer tell you how long we've been on?
It doesn't, but we're probably at about 40, so we can wrap it up. But before we do, what is this?
Look at there.
Oh my God.
What's that?
It's a book with a mud hole on the front of it. That's Tim Peeler's new book that is due out any day now. It is up for pre-sale on RedHawkPublications.com. It's a trilogy of Mr. Peeler's prose poems, and they too kind of are informed by the angst and horror of living in the South and living in, just being a human being, the horror of being a human being. Because being a human being is hard. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. I think I'd much rather go back to being the ferret that I was in a previous life or something than to be the human being, because being able to think and reason is rough, because there's not enough people in society that can think and reason, and that drives you almost insane.
But if people think and reason enough, they will show up on August 8th to see David Dickson and Ron Rash.
That is right.
Also, just to point out, David Dickson and Ron Rash will also be in Elkin. So this will be out before August 5th, Monday. David and Ron will also be at the Elkin Library at 7 p.m., where they will both do reading, and also books will be for sale.
Yeah. Like Dave's going to be like Ron's opening band act.
Yeah.
Dave's going to be Aerosmith.
Black Oak, Arkansas.
Black Oak, Arkansas. Molly Hatchet.
Where are you guys all going, David? I think you're going to Wilkes.
I'm not sure about that. I know that we're doing Elkin and Hickory, and then I know Ron's doing a thing in Boone.
Right.
And then there may be one in Wilkesboro or Lenore, but I haven't spoken with him in a couple weques. I'll find out.
Oh, it'd be terrible if you got kicked off the tour.
Well, you
It
never
would be
know. It
good.
could happen. But the interesting thing is, it's because of the re-release in softbound format of his book, The Caretaker. The Caretaker came out a year ago, and
Right.
I think the paperback just came out maybe a few weeks ago. So
Mhm.
that's why he's doing this little mini tour to
Right.
promote the sales of the softbound book. And it's lovely for him to do that and to visit his old neighborhood. David used to live in Hickory. Ron
Yes.
used to live in Hickory twice. So it's like homecoming for you guys, August 8th.
Yes.
Hey, Peeler, have you tried to get to be the opening band with Trap Game? Maybe
I can't go that far.
you can't go that far.
No.
Because you can remember those opening bands. Remember when you have like 3 bands and one of them would be usually like a local band and they'd have like a really cheap
Right.
drum set on the stage. And then they'd come out there and you'd go like, who are these people? And
It's like a comedy show. You've got your opener, you've got your feature, and then you've got your headliner.
There
So
you go.
there you go. That's it.
And that was when concert tickets were $4.
Yeah. Honest to God, I think I saw Kiss in 1979 in Charlotte for like $14. And I think they had 3 bands. I can't even remember what the other 2 were. But
I saw them the year they came out for maybe $5 or $6.
really back in the
Yeah.
74,
When nobody knew who they were. It's like, what
Wow.
the hell is that?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to wrap it up here. Make sure you go to redhawkpublications.com and get a copy of David's book. I got about 30 copies of them autographed in there. Got them on sale for $12 a piece, and shipping will be like $4.63 media mail. We'll stop one in an envelope and mail it to you. Remember, we're sponsored by Tasteful Beans Coffee House in downtown Hickory. Open 24 hours a day like IHOP. Not really. That's a lie. I don't even know what their hours are. I think they're like 8 to 8 or something like that. There's also Redhawk Publication books in there too. So if you want to see like what some of our books look like, we've identified some that you can sit there and read while you're drinking coffee. And then if you want to buy one, there'll be some nice pristine copies over there. Here's a shout out to our executive director, Richard Eller. Hope you feel better. We miss you. And I guess that's it for this. For Patty Thompson and David Dickson and Tim Peeler, I'm Robert Knipe. And this is RedPubPod.
can David say that?
Oh, yeah. Thanks for listening to Red Pub Pod with these guys. I appreciate y'all talking to me. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Yeah. And remember, when anybody asks you what your favorite podcast is, tell them RedPubPod. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that little bell where you'll get notified when we have a new one, and subscribe and like and everything else. And you can get our podcast at all the places that you like to get podcasts, thanks to the Mesh and all the guys downtown that we pay money to syndicate this thing for us. So thank y'all very much. And please come back and listen to us again. Take care.
Good to see you, folks. See you, double.
This is
RedPubPod.
RedPubPod. RedPubPod. A podcast from Redhawk Publications. RedPubPod.
Redhawk Pod.